At 2:17 a.m., surrounded by flames, David Wallace, 38, whispered something he had never said before. "If anyone can hear me, guide me." This happened on November 8, 2018, in Paradise, California. David was not a hero, not a firefighter, not a believer looking for miracles. He was an ordinary delivery driver, divorced, exhausted, living paycheck to paycheck, asleep on his couch when his phone vibrated once, then went silent. No sirens, no knock on the door, just an orange glow leaking through the window like sunrise at the wrong hour. When he opened the door, the heat hit him first, then the sound, a low, violent roar, as if the earth itself was burning. The campfire had already jumped the ridge. In less than 20 minutes, the town was turning into an oven. David grabbed his keys, his jacket, and nothing else. By the time he reached his truck, embers were raining from the sky. He drove. Within minutes, traffic stopped, cars abandoned, people screaming. The GPS went dark, cell service died, the engine stalled. David stepped out and realized the truth. Fire on all sides, no visible exit, no safe direction. The air burned his lungs, his eyes swelled shut. He dropped to his knees behind the truck, convinced this was how it ended. Not dramatically, not bravely, but alone and unseen. That's when something strange happened. Not a voice, not a vision, just a sudden, overwhelming certainty, like a pressure inside his chest, telling him to stand up and walk into the smoke, not away from it. It made no sense. Every instinct screamed, "Don't." But for reasons he still struggles to explain, David obeyed.
David stood up, immediately regretting it. The heat slammed into him like a wall. His jacket began to smolder at the cuffs. Instinct told him to run back to the truck, to lie flat, to do anything except move forward. But that same inner pressure returned, stronger now. Not words. Direction. Left. 3 steps. Then forward. David later said this was the moment he stopped thinking like a man trying to survive and started moving like someone being led. November 8, 2018, Paradise, California. The town was officially lost, though he didn't know that yet. He wrapped his jacket over his mouth and walked into smoke so thick it felt solid. Visibility less than 2 feet. Sound, crackling, exploding trees, distant screams that faded too quickly. He counted steps to stay conscious. Then something impossible happened. The temperature dropped, not cool, but survivable, as if he had crossed an invisible line. David stumbled into a shallow ditch he didn't know existed, half filled with damp mud and dead leaves. He collapsed face first, coughing, his body shaking violently. The fire passed, not over him, around him. Flames raced along the road he'd just left, devouring abandoned cars. Trees exploded on both sides, but the ditch, barely 3 feet deep, remained untouched. David pressed himself into the mud as embers fell inches from his back. His mind went quiet. No panic, no thoughts, just one emotion he couldn't explain. Gratitude, before survival was even certain. Minutes felt like hours. When the roar finally softened, David lifted his head. The world was black. Ash snowed from the sky. And that's when he heard it. A voice. Not inside his head this time. A woman, coughing, calling for help, somewhere close. David's legs barely worked, but he stood anyway, because whatever had guided him here wasn't finished yet.
"Hello?" David croaked, his throat raw, barely producing sound. The reply came weak, but real. I'm here. Please.
The voice belonged to Linda Perez, 62, a retired school cafeteria worker who had lived in Paradise for over 3 decades. Her car had died less than a mile from where David abandoned his truck. Disoriented by smoke, she had wandered off the road, straight into the same ditch. David found her curled against the dirt wall, one shoe missing, her hands burned, eyes swollen shut. She shouldn't have been alive, and neither should he. November 8, 2018, sometime after 3 a.m. No emergency services, no evacuation crews. Paradise was gone. David wanted to stay. His body screamed for rest, but that inner pressure returned, quieter now, but firm. Move now. He helped Linda to her feet. She leaned fully on him, barely conscious. Each step felt heavier than the last. They moved through ash and wreckage that had once been homes. Mailboxes melted, cars fused into the asphalt. At one point, Linda whispered, "I thought I was being punished." David didn't answer. He didn't have one. Instead, he tightened his grip and kept walking. They followed a faint slope downward, something David hadn't noticed earlier. The smoke thinned just enough to reveal flashing lights in the distance. Not close, but possible. Linda collapsed again, this time not breathing for several terrifying seconds. David pounded her chest, screaming her name like he'd known her his whole life. She gasped back to life. When they finally reached a roadblock hours later, a firefighter stared at them like ghosts. "You came from there?" he asked, pointing toward total darkness. David nodded. The firefighter swallowed hard. "No one makes it out of there." Linda was rushed to a hospital. David sat on the curb, shaking uncontrollably. That's when it hit him. He hadn't been guided to escape. He had been guided to stay alive long enough to help someone else. And that realization would change everything.
David was discharged from the emergency shelter 2 days later with minor burns, smoke inhalation, and a question that would not leave him alone. Why me? Paradise, California no longer existed the way it had on November 8, 2018. Entire neighborhoods were erased. 85 people were dead. Thousands had no homes. David sat on the steps of a Red Cross shelter, staring at his hands that had pulled a stranger through fire, and felt something unfamiliar. Responsibility. Linda survived. She asked for him by name at the hospital. When they reunited, she cried and said something that unsettled him deeply. "I kept thinking, if I don't stand up, you die too." That night, David couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt it again, that invisible pressure, that certainty without explanation. But now it wasn't telling him where to walk, it was asking something harder. Who are you now? Before the fire, David lived disconnected, avoiding people, numbing himself with work, convinced that kindness was optional and belief was naive. He helped when it was convenient, loved at a distance. After the fire, those defenses felt meaningless. He began volunteering at evacuation centers, not speaking, just showing up, carrying boxes, sitting with people who stared into nothing. One afternoon, a man broke down sobbing in front of him. David hugged him without thinking. Later, he realized something profound. The same force that guided him through fire was present in moments of human compassion. No visions, no voices, just action, especially when it costs something. David stopped asking if what happened was real, because the change inside him was undeniable. And yet, one final moment would seal it forever. 6 months after the fire, on May 14, 2019, David Wallace returned to what remained of Paradise. Not to rebuild, not to look for closure. He came to stand where he should have died. The road was still scarred, twisted metal, half buried in ash. The ditch was there, shallow, unremarkable, easy to miss. David stood silently, overwhelmed by how ordinary the place looked. That terrified him, because it meant miracles don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they hide in places we'd never choose to step into. David never claimed to understand what guided him that night. He never labeled it, never preached it. What he knew was this: when everything was burning, love showed him where to walk. Today, David works as a volunteer coordinator for wildfire recovery efforts across Northern California. He still drives delivery trucks to pay bills. He's still ordinary, but he no longer walks past pain pretending it's not his problem. He calls Linda every November 8th. They don't talk about the fire much. They talk about birthdays, about weather, about small living things. David says the real transformation wasn't surviving flames. It was learning that mercy moves before logic. And maybe that's the part no one talks about. The guidance didn't save him from the fire. It carried him through it. So if you ever find yourself surrounded by loss, fear, or a moment with no clear exit, remember this: the way out may not look safe. It may not make sense. But sometimes the path appears only after you choose to care about someone else. The fire didn't make him special. It made him awake.